Okay, I need you to stay with me on this one. It's a Tuesday morning, August 9th, 2005. Kingston, Tennessee. And I mean small-town Kingston, the kind of place where nothing happens. A courthouse so routine that the officers doing the transfer that morning had probably done it 100 times before. 2 veteran corrections officers, 1 shackled prisoner, a side door, a parking lot. That's it. That's the whole setup. Then a gold minivan rolls up, a woman jumps out, and I know how that sounds. But just wait. She raises a 9mm pistol and fires 3 shots. All 3 hit the same officer, straight to the abdomen. He drops to the pavement right there in the parking lot. The prisoner, still in shackles, hands still cuffed, runs. She takes a bullet herself. Doesn't stop. Throws open the passenger door. Becky hauls himself in. Tires scream, and just like that, they're gone. Here's the part that'll mess with your head, though. She was a nurse. She had 3 kids at home. She had never been arrested a single day in her life. So what on earth turns a woman like that into a killer? To answer that, we have to go back to where this love story and this tragedy truly began. But real quick, before we go any further, if you've never heard of George and Jennifer Hyatte, you are not alone. This case flew completely under the radar for years, and honestly, it deserves way more attention than it ever got. Hit subscribe so you never miss the stories history tried to bury. And drop a comment right now. Could love ever push you to do something like this? I genuinely want to know where you stand. All right, let's get into it. So, who exactly is this guy? George Hyatte was born June 30th, 1971. And from basically the jump, life was chaos. Parents split early. Foster care, no stability, no anchor. By the time he was 9 years old, he already had his first law enforcement contact. Not for anything dramatic, truancy, school fights. But still, 9 years old. Teenage years didn't get better. Substance abuse, dropped out of school. And by his early 20s, he'd graduated to burglary, theft, and armed robbery. A 1993 court report described him as, and this is a direct quote, a repeat offender with a tendency towards violence. He was also a member of the Gangster Disciples, Chicago-based street gang, which meant he wasn't just a lone wolf. He had a network, structure, people who moved when he needed them to move. But here's what really sets George apart from your average career criminal. The man could not stay locked up. Between 1990 and 2002, he pulled off at least 5 documented escapes or attempts. 5 in 12 years. In 1998, he escaped custody after a single day inside. 1 day. Recaptured fast, but still. Sentenced to 36 months just for the attempt. Then, in 2002, Florida, he somehow fashioned a knife out of toothbrushes and a razor blade. Used it to threaten guards into handing over their keys. Locked 8 corrections officers in a cell. Beat 1 unconscious. Then fled across state lines before getting caught at a DUI checkpoint in Southwest Florida of all places. That one cost him 10 years. There was also a police cruiser escape, post-robbery. A girlfriend helped him hide under a pile of laundry until officers tracked him down. By 2005, George was 2 years into a 35-year sentence. Total accumulated sentences across his record? 41 years. He was classified close custody at Riverbend Maximum Security, meaning no visits, heightened supervision, the works. The system knew exactly what he was capable of, and they still moved him with minimal security. George Hyatte was a man the system could never hold. But the one thing that finally slowed him down, temporarily, wasn't a cell or a chain. It was a woman in scrubs who walked into the wrong prison at the wrong time. Now I need you to set aside everything you just heard about George for a second, because Jennifer Forsyth is a completely different story. Born February 11th, 1974, a licensed practical nurse out of Utah. mother of 3 kids from her previous marriage to a man named Eli Gourdan. Her oldest was just 12 years old. Clean record, stable career. By every measure, Jennifer was exactly the kind of person you'd want living next door. In early 2004, she took a contract nursing position at Northwest Correctional Complex in Tiptonville, Tennessee. Routine job, decent pay, nothing about it should have changed her life. Then she met George. Within weeks, she was sneaking him extra food and snacks. Little things at first, an extra sandwich, a bag of chips. She probably told herself it was just compassion, just being kind to someone who had nothing. And maybe it was at first, but George Hyatte didn't do anything by accident. By August 2004, she got caught. Fired on the spot. George was simultaneously transferred to Riverbend, 200 miles away. You'd think that would be the end of it. It wasn't. If anything, the distance made it worse. Letters started flowing, rare phone calls, the kind of desperate, all-consuming communication that only happens when 2 people can't be together. And Jennifer, a woman who had never broken a serious rule in her life, found herself completely consumed by a man she could barely even reach. Here's the detail that sticks with me, though. Prison chaplain Jerry Wellborn, who counseled the couple before their eventual wedding, said this: Jennifer dragged her feet on the marriage. He was anxious to get married. She was dragging her feet. She had doubts, real ones. She just couldn't hold on to them. Because here's the truth about Jennifer Forsyth. She wasn't a criminal who fell in love. She was a law-abiding mother of 3 who got slowly, methodically groomed by one of the most escape-obsessed inmates in Tennessee history. And by the time she realized what was happening, she was already in too deep to see it clearly. By late 2004, George had a new obsession. And it wasn't just Jennifer. It was the idea that she could be his way out. Late November 2004, George and Jennifer file a formal marriage request with Warden Ricky Bell at Riverbend Maximum Security. And Bell, a man who had been with the Tennessee Department of Corrections since 1970, a warden since 1992, was alarmed. This wasn't some rookie administrator who didn't know the file. And Bell had over 30 years in the system. He knew exactly who George Hyatte was. He knew Jennifer had already broken rules to get close to him. But here's the thing. Inmate marriage rights are protected by law. Bell couldn't just say no. So instead, he said yes, with conditions. No physical contact whatsoever. A glass partition separating them for the entire ceremony. No kissing, no hand-holding. Guards and the chaplain present the whole time. Chaplain Jerry Wellborn sat down with Jennifer beforehand and laid it all out. George's violent history, his drug issues, the decades of sentence still ahead of him. He didn't sugarcoat a single word. She listened to every bit of it. And then she said yes anyway. May 21st, 2005. Inside Riverbend's walls, George and Jennifer Hyatte got married. The ceremony was brief, joyless, honestly. They stood on opposite sides of a glass partition, said their vows, and became husband and wife, without ever once touching each other. No first kiss, no hand to hold. Just glass between them and a chaplain reading words that felt almost cruel given the circumstances. That night, Jennifer drove home to her 3 kids, alone. George walked back to his cell. That was their wedding night. And from that moment forward, one thought took over everything for Jennifer. It crowded out reason, crowded out fear, crowded out every instinct that had kept her law-abiding for 31 years. She had to get him out. And George, who had escaped 5 times before, already knew exactly how she was going to do it. Here's where the story shifts from tragic to terrifying. George still had an unresolved armed robbery charge sitting on the books, which meant a court date. And that court date was set for August 9th, 2005, Roane County Courthouse, Kingston, Tennessee. For most inmates, a court date is just paperwork, a formality. For George Hyatte, it was a blueprint. Think about it. For one morning, he wouldn't be behind Riverbend's walls. He'd be in transit, in a parking lot, in the open air, And if someone was waiting, someone who knew exactly where he'd emerge and exactly when. The window was right there. Through carefully worded letters and the rare phone call they were allowed, George fed Jennifer every detail she needed. The time, the location, the exit point. All of it, piece by piece, disguised well enough to get past whatever monitoring existed. Jennifer didn't just show up and wing it. She prepared. She acquired a 9mm pistol. And by all accounts, she genuinely hoped she'd never have to pull the trigger. She studied the courthouse layout, figured out exactly where prisoners would be brought out, positioned herself mentally for every scenario, and she arranged 2 vehicles, her own dark-colored Ford Explorer as the backup, and a gold Chevrolet Venture minivan, stolen, as the primary getaway car. 2 vehicles to split the trail, confuse pursuers, buy them time. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned. Now here's the part that should make your stomach drop. A Utah probation officer received a tip from an inmate that Jennifer Forsyth intended to do something drastic during George's August 2005 court hearing. That warning was passed along to Tennessee authorities, and it didn't appear to raise any flags. Read that again. A direct, specific tip about an escape attempt involving a known violent offender with 5 prior escapes. And nobody acted on it. Nobody pulled George's transfer. Nobody added security. Nobody called Jennifer in for questioning. Nothing. If that tip had been taken seriously, if one person had picked up a phone and followed through, Officer Wayne Morgan would have gone home to his family that night. This wasn't just a security failure, it was a failure of basic human attention, and a good man paid for it with his life.
20 years ago, Officer Wayne Cotton Morgan was shot and killed while transporting an inmate outside of the Roane County Courthouse. Today, the county honored his sacrifice in the line of duty.
The inmate, George Hyatte, was just sentenced to 35 years and was being transported back when tragedy struck.
The day before the escape, August 8, 2005, Jennifer called her ex-husband, Eli Gordon, told him George was going to be released. She wasn't being cryptic. She genuinely believed this was the start of their new life. Her, George, maybe even her kids, finally together, finally free. She had no idea how wrong she was. August 9th, 2005, Kingston, Tennessee, a small courthouse, a routine transfer, and a gold minivan idling in the parking lot. 10 o'clock in the morning, August 9th, 2005. Inside the Roane County Courthouse, George Hyatte stands before a judge and pleads guilty to the robbery charge. Routine. Unremarkable. The kind of hearing that wraps up in under an hour. Then 2 corrections officers take him by the arms and walk him out. On his left, Wayne Cotton Morgan, 56 years old, decades of service at Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary. The kind of officer who had seen everything, done everything, and was quietly counting down the days to retirement. On his right, Larry Porky Harris, younger, armed. George shuffles between them in shackles, chains dragging against the pavement, hands cuffed in front of him. In the parking lot, a gold minivan edges closer. Jennifer steps out. She raises the 9mm. 3 shots. All 3 find Officer Morgan, straight to the abdomen. He crumples to the ground right there in the open air, bleeding heavily. Harris takes a bullet in the arm, but stays on his feet, draws his own weapon, and fires back, catching Jennifer in the leg. She doesn't stop. George, still shackled, hands still bound, wrenches himself free from the chaos and runs. Jennifer, bleeding, fighting through the pain, throws open the passenger door. George hauls himself in. She slams the accelerator to the floor. A tires scream. They're gone. Officer Morgan was rushed to the nearest hospital. He didn't make it. His death marked the first killing of a corrections officer in Tennessee in years. And here's the detail I can't shake. Cotton Morgan was nearing retirement. He had spent decades of his life keeping people safe inside some of the toughest prisons in the state. He walked out a side door on a Tuesday morning, and never walked back. Officer Morgan never made it home. A warning was ignored, and 2 fugitives were now racing north with a serious head start. If you're finding this story as unbelievable as I did, share this video. These officers deserve to be remembered. And keep watching, because the cab driver twist, it's coming, and it's wild. The gold Chevrolet Venture gets left behind almost immediately. And by the time anyone thought to check the parking lot near the courthouse, the van was already cold, doors open, engine off. And on the driver's seat, a large smear of blood. Jennifer's. From the bullet Harris put in her leg, they were already gone. The Ford Explorer swallowed them into normal traffic like they were just another Tuesday. No sirens behind them yet, just open road and a radio crackling with news they were desperately trying to stay ahead of. For the rest of August 9th, they drove north, back roads, off the main highways, every mile putting more distance between them and Kingston, Tennessee. Every hour the search net widened, Kentucky State Police notified, then Ohio. 2 states now looking for a couple that had just shot 2 corrections officers and killed one of them in broad daylight. Late that night, they pulled into the parking lot of an Econo Lodge near Erlanger, Kentucky, just south of Cincinnati. The Explorer got left there, another breadcrumb for investigators to eventually find. And then they made a decision that was either brilliantly bold or completely desperate. Honestly, maybe both. They called a taxi. Just think about that for a second. 2 of America's most wanted fugitives, one with a fresh gunshot wound in her leg, one still carrying the physical marks of a morning spent in shackles, standing in a Kentucky parking lot at night, calling a cab, like they were heading to a business trip, like nothing had happened. The cab that answered that call was driven by a man named Mike Wagers, and Mike Wagers was paying attention. Early morning hours of August 10th, 2005. Now Mike Wagers is working a regular shift out of the Cincinnati area when a fare comes in from Erlanger, Kentucky. He pulls up and 2 people climb in. A stocky, quiet man and a woman with dark hair, freshly dyed black, who slides into the seat and immediately winces. She's walking with a noticeable limp. They want to go to Columbus, Ohio, 115 miles, roughly a 2-hour drive, and they're offering $200 cash up front. Wagers takes the fare, pulls onto the highway, makes some small talk to break the silence, asks what brings them to Columbus. An Amway convention, they say. And that's when something shifts for Wagers. His exact words, "Amway people are all about Amway, and when they didn't try any conversation further about it, that's when I pretty much thought, well, they're not with Amway. They're doing something else." Anyone who's ever met an Amway person knows they cannot stop talking about Amway. It's basically their personality. These 2 mentioned it once and went completely quiet. Jennifer winces again. Wagers asks if she's okay. "Car accident," she says, "happened up in northern Kentucky." He notices her hair looks freshly colored, the kind of dye job you do fast, not carefully. He keeps driving, keeps watching them in the rearview mirror. No proof of anything, just instinct sitting heavy in his chest. They roll into Columbus and he drops them at the America's Best Value Inn, a budget motel just off the highway. They pay the $185 fare in cash and hand him a $15 tip. Wagers later reflected, in the cab business, technically that might have been a little bit light on the tip, but when you're getting a $185 cash trip, when they only throw in another $15, you're not going to think anything bad. You're going to say you appreciate it and you're going to go on your way. So he did. Drove back to Kentucky, clocked out, went home. He was sitting on his couch, playing video games, when a friend called and mentioned that investigators had found a fugitive couple's abandoned van near Erlanger, near the exact spot where Wagers had picked up his last fare. His words, "I was at home relaxing, playing video games when I heard I might be the one." He called law enforcement immediately, gave them everything, the motel name, the location, the description of the couple, America's Best Value Inn, Columbus, Ohio. Within hours, Our 25 law enforcement officers had the place surrounded. The only question left was, would George Hyatte go out in a blaze of glory, or would Jennifer talk him down? Around lunchtime on August 10th, the Hyattes checked into a second-floor room at the America's Best Value Inn. $52.99 a night. Cash. 3 nights. Manager Kundan Desai processed the booking without a second thought, and for the first time since any of this began, they had privacy. No glass partition, no guards, no chaplain watching from the corner. Just a motel room, a locked door, and each other. For a few hours, they weren't fugitives. They weren't killers. They were just George and Jennifer, the husband and wife they'd always wanted to be. When investigators later searched that room, here's what they found: Mountain Dew and Hawaiian Punch cans on the nightstand, takeout wrappers on the desk, one mattress pushed halfway off the box spring, 36 hours of freedom. That's all they got. On the night of August 10th, at least 25 law enforcement officers quietly surrounded the motel. U.S. Marshals, Columbus Police, positioned at every exit. Deputy U.S. Marshal Nikki Ralston picked up the phone and called the room. A woman answered. Ralston's account. I said, "Hey, Jennifer." She said, "Yes," and I knew it was her. I said, "You need to get George. Both of you need to exit the hotel room and follow the directions of the officers who will be to your immediate right." Jennifer begged George not to fight it, and whatever hold she had over him, it worked. The door opened slowly. Jennifer came out first, limping, hands raised, immediately cuffed. She kept craning her neck back toward the room, pleading, "Please don't hurt him." Then George appeared, T-shirt pulled up over his face to show he wasn't armed, hands visible. He dropped to his knees without a word. Motel guest Robin Penn watched the whole thing from the parking lot. Her observation: they really didn't show any emotion at all. 36 hours of freedom. Over. George was going back to prison, but this time Jennifer was going with him. Both George and Jennifer were charged with first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, assault, and felony escape. And from the start, prosecutors made clear they were considering the death penalty. This was the killing of a law enforcement officer after all. Jennifer moved first on September 17, 2007. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and facilitating escape. The sentence: life without the possibility of parole, plus 15 years, plus 3 more. She is currently incarcerated at the Tennessee Prison for Women in Nashville. As part of her plea, Jennifer agreed to testify against Randall Ridenour, the prison guard at Riverbend who had lent George his personal cell phone to call Jennifer and had called her himself. Without Ridenour's phone, the entire plan likely never gets off the ground. He wasn't just a bystander, he was the inside man. George held out longer. His trial was scheduled for March 25, 2009. But on March 9th, just over 2 weeks before jury selection, he pleaded guilty to everything, including the first-degree murder of Officer Wayne Morgan. On same sentence as Jennifer: life without parole, plus 15 years, plus 3. Assistant District Attorney Frank Harvey put it plainly: a death penalty case is always a roll of the dice. If they wanted us to go forward, we would have. Officer Morgan's son, Dennis, spoke for the family. We can get on with the rest of our lives and get some closure. More than 24 corrections officers filled that courtroom alongside the Morgan family. People who had worked alongside Cotton Morgan. People who understood exactly what was lost on that Tuesday morning in a Kingston parking lot. 3 people destroyed their lives for a 36-hour motel stay. A man who lent his phone, a woman who pulled a trigger, and a husband who convinced her it was love. Wayne Cotton Morgan never made it home. So what do we actually learn from all of this? Because if the story ends here without asking that question, we've done Cotton Morgan a disservice. First, intelligence tips are only useful if someone acts on them. A Utah probation officer passed along a direct, specific warning that Jennifer planned something drastic at George's August hearing. It reached Tennessee authorities, and it went nowhere. That's not a paperwork problem. That's a culture problem. A warning about a man with 5 prior escapes should have triggered immediate action, not a shrug. Second, staff and inmate relationships are a security crisis waiting to happen. Jennifer cleared every background check. Nothing flagged her, because the system wasn't looking for grooming, it was looking for criminal history. Those are 2 completely different things. Regular psychological screening for staff working closely with high-risk inmates isn't excessive. It's basic. Third, escape history must mean something. 5 documented escapes, 41 years of accumulated sentences, close custody classification, and George Hyatte still got walked through a parking lot with minimal protection. At some point, the file has to change the protocol. Fourth, courthouse transfers are the single most vulnerable moment in any high-risk inmate's movement. Predictable routes, predictable timing, minimal cover, randomized schedules, armored transport, and tactical escorts for inmates with documented escape histories aren't luxuries, they're necessities. Fifth, the inside facilitator is almost always the most dangerous piece. Randall Ridenour lent George a cell phone. That's it. And that one act made the entire plan possible. Jamming signals, monitoring communications, and creating a culture where staff report suspicious behavior without fear. These things save lives. Behind every escape statistic is a family like the Morgans, waiting for a father, a partner, a colleague to come home. Wayne Cotton Morgan deserved better. The system failed him, and the very least we can do is make sure it never fails anyone else. Officer Morgan's story deserves to be heard. If this video moved you, share it. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to cases like this one getting the attention they deserve. Subscribe for more stories the mainstream media buried and forgot. And tell me in the comments, who do you think carries more blame? Jennifer, George, or the system that ignored every single warning sign? And I read every comment. Let's talk about it.